Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us at the 5G Transformation Forum. To get started today, we're going to get an overview from Mr. Leo Gergs of ABI Research as to the status of 5G globally. So I'm going to turn it over to Leo.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. And thanks, Sean, for the kind introduction. As Sean rightly said, I am a research analyst at ABI Research looking at 5G with a focus on monetization of 5G, both in the consumer and in the enterprise domain. So to look at the status of 5G globally, what I'm going to do today in this 10 minutes or so is first of all, look at the state of 5G in the consumer domain, then talk about what we see, how we see the size of the 5G enterprise opportunity, and look at some of the key drivers for 5G in the enterprise domain to arrive at some of the conclusions. Now, first of all, if we look at the 5G or the state of 5G in the consumer domain, we can say that obviously rollout for 5G is really well underway and I've just checked this earlier this morning with just 163 operators having launched their 5G services around the globe. Now, if we look at the number of 5G subscriptions, they will increase. We see that they will increase from just 13 million in 2019 to more than 1.8 billion subscribers in 2025. That's a compound aggregate growth rate of 127%. Obviously, not very surprisingly, the early adopters that we see in the market just now or these days are among China, South Korea, Switzerland, and the United States. But the followers, and what I mean with that is really the countries that will comprise the most subscribers in 2025 onwards will be more or less the developing nations or economies: India, Japan, Indonesia, and Russia. That's why I said more or less. I wouldn't classify Japan as a developing economy just now, but by and large, if you look at the rest of them. Now, a similar picture holds when you look at the network traffic that's generated from 5G, and that will increase from, we project that it will increase from 23 exabytes in 2019 to 1,331 exabytes. So by 2025, 5G will account for almost 50% of overall mobile network data traffic. And with immense new use cases and applications around augmented reality, virtual reality, and the mass adoption of artificial intelligence, that will increase even further disproportionately beyond 2025. So we see really an exponential growth rather than a linear growth when we look at the network data traffic. If we look at the size of the 5G enterprise opportunity, we see we look at primarily two deployment options. One is a full-on private network deployment where all network functions and all network components are deployed on the premise of, say, an enterprise, or the opportunity for network slicing, where an operator uses or slices their macro public network to provide to a dedicated enterprise. And what we see here is that in total, the enterprise opportunity for 5G by 2030 will be around 82 billion US dollar. And as you can see, the majority of which, 64 billion US dollar, we see contributed by private network deployment, while 18 billion will be contributed by this network slicing approach. Now, why this network slicing take off later than private network deployment is because of standardization issues, where for network slicing, for full network slicing to be enabled, it needs 3GPP release 16, especially 5G in standalone mode, which obviously the bottleneck here is that there are just not enough devices within the ecosystem already to support that, while with 3GPP having frozen release 16 just in June last year. So if we look at the nature, obviously the different deployment options target different enterprises. So private network deployments will target large enterprises, which, because of obviously the financial resources that are necessary to deploy everything, all the equipment on premise, and strict requirements towards network integrity. While for small and medium-sized enterprises, network slicing might be more appealing. And if we look at key verticals driving the demand for enterprise connectivity, especially for enterprise 5G, we see really the degree of mission criticality within the use cases as the decisive factor. Where on the one hand, cellular connectivity can add tremendous value to already existing wireless technologies such as Wi-Fi or even Bluetooth, but also where 5G, because of its URLLC capabilities, can add to tangible benefit to what's already in the market with LTE connectivity. Now, turning over to the drivers, and I've touched upon that already, is one of the drivers for 5G in the enterprise domain we see with from a standardization point of view, where we see release 16 and release 17 playing an important role. As I've discussed already, release 16 standardizes key architectural aspects for 5G in the enterprise world. One of them being private networks and the standardization of 5G standalone mode, so the deployment of a 5G core network, and 5G functionalities such as network slicing. The other one is the standardization of 5G operation in unlicensed spectrum with NRU, which provides enterprises with an additional opportunity to operate their network without having to involve a communication service provider. The other release 17 drives the attractiveness for enterprise 5G from a demand point of view, because it standardizes key KPIs, as you can see, MMTC, TSN, and positioning capabilities here. Another key driver for 5G in the enterprise domain is, as I have hinted at already, the deployment of a private network, where customizability, quality of service, and a full control over SLAs, as well as network integrity, plays a role for enterprises. And if you look at the right-hand side, yes, you see that this is the deployment of a private network is seen as the most attractive form by enterprises, whereas renting a network slice is the least preferred option as of today. Now, and last key driver that we see is spectrum liberalization initiatives, which allow enterprises to come into possession of licensed mobile network spectrum without having to involve an operator. And broadly speaking, we see three different kinds of initiatives there. One is obviously brought to attention by the United States with CBRS, where enterprises can access some of the spectrum that has been reserved to public authorities. Another opportunity or another model is presented by or prominent in the United Kingdom with or where enterprises can access shared spectrum that is not been used by mobile network operators. So it has been licensed to mobile network operators, but where the operator doesn't use it, and there's no clear intention to use it either. And the third option that we see in green, in light green here, is a momentum towards setting aside licensed spectrum by the regulator to enterprises. So, for example, France and Germany have been early adopters of this, where the respective regulator has set aside certain parts of the licensed spectrum. In Germany, it's 100 megahertz from 3.7 to 3.8 gigahertz, and where enterprises can apply to the regulator directly for access to that spectrum. Now, obviously, that means that enterprises to deploy a private network don't have to involve a network operator anymore, and therefore can go about much faster to deploy their private network by just reverting to an infrastructure vendor or a hyperscaler and system integrator, in fact. Now, with that, let me conclude and with some recommendations. What we see in general is that the enterprise domain presents an important revenue opportunity for network operators and vendors, which is integral to the success of 5G. On the one hand, and the telco industry should obviously always rely on the consumer domain as their backbone and mustn't lose that backbone, but they should always realize that the 5G in the consumer domain will not be enough to monetize their investment. It needs the enterprise opportunity as well. And successfully targeting the heterogeneous enterprise community requires differentiated offerings that could be along different verticals, but also would need to take into account the size of the respective enterprise that they are trying to target. Now, large enterprises might face different different constraints than mid-sized enterprises, for example. And in doing so, what the telco industry, specifically network operators, should move away from a short-term profit and loss focus point of view and look more towards embracing operational expenditure based revenue models. So looking at service-based revenue models to unlock a long-term sustainable revenue stream rather than short-term profitability. And they should also look at vertical specific go-to-market strategies where they take into account the prevalence of different, maybe vertical specific players within the market. For example, industrial automation vendors in industrial manufacturing, or the prevalence of system integrators in logistics and manufacturing environments. So in short, the opportunities, even though the opportunity in the enterprise domain is much larger than in the consumer space, the fragmentation in the consumer domain makes it somewhat harder and makes it more long-term opportunity to target these and unlock these revenues. And with that, I would like to conclude my presentation and would like to say thank you to Sean for letting me speak and letting me open this event.
Thank you very much, Leo. And now we're going to take a brief pause and go